I've been giving him a lot of praise for his ability to adjust. In when we talked about that Giants game and how much Purdy was blitzed, it was in game that they adjusted to that. And then moving forward, when they faced the Cardinals, they were like more prepared. And in the post game, Kyle Shanahan kind of said, "Oh, well, like we knew that this was going to be a really difficult matchup, and we were, we needed to face that adversity." And my question is kind of like you guys talk like you're the top dogs, act like you're the top dog. Be like, okay, I am the best. I'm the best coach. I have the best offensive weapons. Like I'm going to scheme around this, and I know it's not that simple. And I don't want to be too hard on them because they put themselves in a position to win at the very end. So I also will admit that I think the narrative of this entire game would be so different if they won, or if Jake Moody kicked that last second field goal. But yeah, I was pretty disappointed. Physically on the field, we could see that Purdy was rattled, and I felt like in the play call, we could see that Kyle was rattled in his decision making, in the 3 straight passes, and not drowning out any game clock. I felt like there was multiple decisions on Kyle Shanahan's part that just didn't make sense and kind of made me be like, why in these moments of adversity do sometimes it feels like you shrink? I don't know if you have any thoughts on Kyle
Well,
Shanahan or on my idea that although there were players that were at fault, maybe like that goes back to Kyle in some way because he's the leader.
yeah, I mean, I definitely I'm with you on like the adjustments after some of those injuries because like I do know that coaches go into the game with like a certain game plan and usually you have your starters in that game plan and you're not really thinking about what if this guy gets hurt? What am I going to do now? I think like Debo and Christian McCaffrey, like both of those guys getting injured hurt, especially just because like what they do is so
You
unique.
kind of I remember talking before the season with someone, and they were kind of debating whether or not Ayuk or Debo would go off, and I was like, I think Debo will have a big year, not only because I thought he was coming back in shape, but and not wishing injury on anyone, but just looking at the history of running backs, I was like, if Christian McCaffrey gets hurt, then Debo's production is going to go way up again, and it's like you never. I do understand what you're saying because you plan, you're like, okay, if Christian McCaffrey goes out, we'll utilize Debo. If Debo goes out, we'll use it. You don't plan.
Yeah.
It was like a cluster of all the most important people. Trent Williams. It was like
Yeah, I mean
I
that's pretty notable, right? Like two guys getting hurt who like I think pretty early in the game we saw like they were going to be part of the game plan. To your point, you said like Debo had a few plays early and I kind of got that same sense too that he was going to be used like pretty often in this game and I think it's just to get them going sideline to sideline, stretch them out a little bit more and then maybe hope that opens things up in the middle of the field. But they didn't have that in Debo. And then I felt like Christian McCaffrey, while it was a tough game for him too, because of what we mentioned in the trenches and all that, I still feel like with how good Christian McCaffrey is, that he still had the ability to, break one for a few
yeah.
more yards than maybe you would have thought. Even in the play in which he came back, he thought like, he was like stretching it out and he came back. I forgot how much that gained, but like definitely it was more than I would have expected him to get. And I was like, oh, like cool. And he went back out. But I think having those guys, of course, would have been huge. And Jordan Mason is just a different runner than Christian McCaffrey. That maybe they just weren't anticipating Christian McCaffrey to be out in this one. I do agree that like maybe you could have ran Jordan Mason to the outside, tried that a little bit. Um,
He
but I
was
guess my
having
point is,
success. He was.
yeah,
But
I like
the problem is it was limited, so you don't know there's a
yeah.
difference between breaking a few and like relying on someone and then them knowing they're coming. But go ahead.
But I'll also say like I think Kyle Shanahan did call some good plays. Like if you look how many throws Brock Purdy missed, like I
Yeah.
said, those plays were there. Those plays were there to be made. Guys were open, like you can't really uh put all the blame on Kyle in that case when I think like I mentioned, like it was a total team collapse, and sometimes as good as you coach them, some players aren't going to have good games, and sometimes that happens when you're facing a really good defense, right? So I think that's that's what we saw in this one.